Our next company, Nexalin, and we have it presented by Mr. Randall Letkan H., the CEO and the president, and the Mark White, CEO. So please give the warm welcome to our next presenters.
First of all, I want to thank Andrew Wojciech and the all-star team that he put together. And I'm really excited to be here. As he said, my grandparents are from Poland. It's my first trip here, so this conference got me here. So I spent the last couple days eating pierogies and gołąbkis and all the things my grandmother gave me growing up. So far it's been great for me personally, but now I'm here for Nexalin Technology, and I want to talk a little bit about Nexalin. It's funny that we're following Musis, and I loved your presentation because what really got us here was a friend of mine that's an investment banker, and we had taken over Nexalin about 2.5 years earlier, and his father was suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. And we kind of embarrassed him, and we grabbed him into our conference room and we sat him down, and he said, "My dad's gone. He doesn't recognize anybody in the family." And we said, "Listen, you got to take our device and you got to treat him. Can't hurt him, so don't give up on him. Take our device and treat him." About 4 months later, I had given him a device and he hadn't used it yet. So I was not happy about that. So I wanted either my device back or I wanted him to go treat his father. So he flew from California to Montreal, literally smuggled in our device to the nursing home because he didn't know how it was going to be received there. And after 5 treatments with the device that we have, the nurse stopped him at the door on the 5th treatment and said, "Your father knows where he is, he's eating better, he's socializing, and he knows you're coming to see him." So this was absolutely huge. And to just follow up on that a little bit, about 1.5 months ago, and I think I told this story to a few people here already, but it's a great story. We're sitting in my conference room again now after this treatment. His father now has a big screen in front of him in the nursing home where when a family member calls, picture comes up and he just has to touch the screen. And we called him from the conference room and we talked to him for 30 minutes about hockey and what was going on. He's a former hockey player, as is his son. And it was just a tremendous conversation. And of that 30 minutes, 28 minutes, he was completely lucid. And our device isn't designed for that, but it does a lot of things, and it's interesting because we may be able to work together, especially with the data that you're accumulating. So I would love to have a talk with you a little bit later. I'm going to introduce Mark White. He's going to handle explaining the technology to you. But I wanted to put it in simple format for everybody because a lot of these presentations get fairly complex. And what our product does is it literally resets the brain chemistry. So it does a lot of things for you, and Mark's going to go over that. But simply put, when you're born and you have your perfect brain working in the order that it's supposed to and the right chemicals flowing through the brain, that's wonderful. And you're... I will put the presentation. Okay, I think we're all set now. So as I was saying, at one point you were distributing the right chemicals throughout your brain, and your body and brain were functioning in unison. And sometime during your lifetime, whether it was chemicals, whether it was food additives, pesticides, toxins of any type, alcohol, drugs, something interrupted your brain chemistry, trauma, any one of those items could have done that. And what our product really does is it resets that brain back to normalcy. So I'm going to leave that up to Mark White to tell you how and why it does it. And with that, I want to bring Mark up here and have him give the presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, good news. It's almost lunch. I'm the last one before lunch. I'm not sure how I ended up in this position. This is not necessarily where I wanted to be. The good news is, though, I did take our presentation, which normally, because of some of the complexities of the brain and treating these underlying brain disorders, I wanted to try to meet the time requirements of 20 minutes. I'm sure everybody in the room has a friend, family member, or yourself that might not sleep well, might suffer from depression, anxiety, and then there's a whole list of brain disorders beyond that. Children with ADD, ADHD, and then we can get into other brain disorders like Parkinson's disease, traumatic brain injury, etc. The conversation goes on and on when it comes to brain disorders. Okay, I'm going to spend just a minute on the management side to stay inside the time parameters. Essentially, Mr. Letkavich and myself come from business backgrounds. My specialty is on the startup side and preparing companies for acquisitions and mergers. Mr. Letkavich has been an investment banker for many years. We do run a very lean management team. We use quite a few advisory boards. This allows us to associate with some of the leaders in the field, both from the scientific side, business development side, manufacturing side. So we run a lean internal management team. This also keeps our burn rate low, keeps our expense structure low, and helps us, again, to develop relationships with the leaders in the communities. I'm going to give you just a quick little education on the brain. This will help the rest of the presentation make more sense. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the brain and the disorders associated with the brain can be very complicated. However, it really comes down to two simple systems. The brain only has two systems. One is an electrical system, one is a chemical system. And when these two systems come together and they work in a synergistic manner, or they work in a balanced format, what you have is mental health, life on life's terms, good sleep, good decision making. However, when one or both of these systems gets any form of an imbalance, we now have a symptom. And this is all the list that I just went over, whether it's a sleep issue, a cognitive issue, a memory issue, a depression issue, etc. Everything basically is associated to an imbalance in either the electrical or the chemical or both systems of the brain. We are a medical device company. Our focus is in what we call neuromodulation. I'm going to just touch on the neuromodulation side and the neurostimulation side of the technique that we use. When we talk about the brain's plasticity, we're essentially talking about the brain's ability to organize itself. And by organizing itself, it can balance itself. When we talk about modulation, we're talking about stimulating the brain's ability to organize itself. And this is essentially how the technique of Nexalin technology works. As Mr. Letkavich mentioned though a moment ago, the word I'd like to hold for a moment here is reset. Many of you are familiar with the electrical rhythms of the heart and when you defibrillate the heart. This is an electrical reset when you defibrillate the heart. Because the primary system of the brain is electrical, it would stand to reason that if we can determine the appropriate frequency and the appropriate style of electrical stimulation, we can actually reset the structures of the brain that are associated with balance and what they call homeostasis. A little note about pharmaceuticals, because as you see when we move through the presentation, this industry is enormous. As I mentioned when I started, everyone knows someone on that list, I'm sure. And you'll probably also know that 90% of all treatment or interventions is pharmaceutically based. We are an alternative. We can be used in place of. However, I think it's important to develop a relationship with the pharmaceutical community because they do control about 90% of the treatment interventions for these disorders. This is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, brain disorders, mental health. And so therefore, rather than trying to come to market as the alternative or the drug-free, what we've decided to do is actually begin to investigate a relationship with the pharmaceuticals. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see the name Patrick Kennedy. This was President John F. Kennedy's nephew. He was a sitting congressman in the United States for several years. Some of you may know that the Kennedy family's had a long history of mental illness. And after leaving Congress because of some of his own struggles with mental health, Patrick Kennedy has taken the Kennedy Foundation and the Kennedy name, and he's developed what's called the One Mind Project. And this basically is an international platform to develop the conversation of updated techniques and treatments for mental health. Specifically is to help the biotech and the technologies begin to communicate with the traditional pharma and the psychiatry fields. This is a really fascinating time for the Kennedy Group because one of their primary issues is the amount of time and money that it takes to become a provider, an approved provider of treatment in the mental health field. And it takes millions and millions of dollars. We've found some ways to maneuver through that challenge over the past few years at Nexalin, and I'll touch on that as we move through. Let's talk about how we stimulate the brain. Basically, let me actually go back to the patented waveform. I took out the slide that spends a lot of time about the IP protection, but all of our indications, both at the FDA level and the CE and all the various countries, we enjoy very stable IP protection. In fact, it was one of the original projects of the founders of the company to establish not just national IP protection in the United States, but essentially to protect the technology all over the entire globe. At the time that the technology was developed, there was a lot of negativity about alternative treatments in the pharmaceutical communities, so they wanted to make sure that the technology was isolated and protected and never was put into a position where someone could challenge it or harm it in any way. What we're doing is we're delivering a waveform. The two blue dots on the screen, and I'm going to show you an actual patient photo here in a moment. The two blue dots on the screen are going to show that we are going to triangulate what's called the midbrain. The midbrain has an area called the hypothalamus. This is what's called the brain's brain, and that orange dot in the middle represents the hypothalamus. So what we're going to do is we're going to triangulate the entire midbrain structure and the associated structure called the hypothalamus that is directly related to, again, balance. Remember, the mission here is to balance and reset a trauma response in the brain that is driving the symptoms. As we mentioned earlier, the Nexalin technology has been cleared through the FDA. Currently, we're indicated for the treatments of anxiety, depression, and insomnia. We're also CE marked for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and chronic pain. Now, again, I'm going to show another slide a little later, which is going to show the future of the indications. This is a picture of the device. As you can see, our device is fairly simple. Again, we're trying to simplify this so that not only the psychiatrist can use the technology, we'd like for the psychologist to use the technology, we'd like the general practitioner to use the technology, we'd like the naturopathic use the technology. So essentially, any licensed healthcare practitioner can use this technology. You simply need to be licensed in the state or country to provide some form of a healthcare service and to be able to diagnose some form of a mental disorder. This is the treatment actually taking place. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to triangulate. So we're going to put a pad on the forehead. We're going to put one pad behind each ear, setting up that triangulation. And then the patient sits in a quiet room for 40 minutes. The treatment is undetectable. You will not feel anything. It does not require anesthesia. You do not need a physician or any type of clinician to be in the room with you. This is an interesting part of the business model because when we go to the physicians and the clinicians, one of their first questions is do I need to be in the room? Absolutely not. Nexalin technology will come in and install the device, which is basically take it out of a briefcase and put it on a desk. We will train staff members to provide the treatment. The doctor is simply the referral source. He needs to diagnose the treatment, and then the clinicians in the office will take it from there. It is our opinion, and we heavily promote the fact that Nexalin, because of its ability to reset systems in the brain, that all patients, prior to be given medication, if they're coming to you for the first time, would first receive Nexalin technology, and then if there were any symptoms remaining, we would look at the relationship between the pharmaceutical or the medication and the stimulation. Concerning efficacy. So again, since we are in an industry that is primarily controlled by medications, you'll see there that most studies in the United States, when you get FDA clearance, the hurdle, if you will, that you need to get over is if 25% of your patients have a 30% improvement, you will more than likely gain approval and go to market. So if you take 10 patients in a room, and if 2 to 3 of them tell you that on a scale of 1 to 10, their depression is 10, And if they tell you that after treatment it's a 7, we're good to go. Let's go to treatment. The good news is, when you stimulate the brain's ability to regulate itself, to do it naturally, and to bring about a balance in the electrical and chemical systems, because they are basically two sides of the same coin, what we have seen is 75% of our patients will receive a 70% reduction in symptoms. 90% report at least a 50% improvement. I mean, I believe that this is as much a statement about the technology and the power of the technology as it is about the power of our own brain and its ability to regulate itself under the right circumstances. And again, this is an enormous opportunity to change the entire mental health community. Neurostimulation is coming along at a very fast pace, and I'll touch on that again in a few minutes. Our average improvement for anxiety, 77%, 74%, 84%. Again, I took out 2 or 3 of the slides that explains how we get to these numbers. For the medical professionals in the room, they'll appreciate that that is a very complicated set of statistics. There's a lot of moving parts to that, but we felt like it was just, we wanted to just kind of give you the final numbers and the conclusions. Let's talk about stimulators. Stimulators, I made a note here to remind myself, stimulators are not created equally. Stimulation and electrical stimulation has been around for 50, 60, almost 70 years. Many of you in the room will know it as ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy. That is associated with anesthesia. They strap you to a table, and essentially they use a DC current at a very powerful voltage and place one electrode on the left temporal and right temporal and put you to sleep, and they put you into convulsion, so electroconvulsive therapy. There's also the transcranial direct current stimulation. These are the little battery-operated devices that you can buy on the internet. They've been around 40, 50 years, and essentially they're enjoying the luxury, if you will, of the development of the high-end, very sophisticated technologies that are coming to market. And as the internet will do, you can make some pretty broad-based statements. There are some more advanced direct current stimulators coming to market. They're caught up in the research phase. And the top listing, and you'll notice transcranial magnetic stim, you'll see VC and the $sign. The reason I put this here is the venture capitalists, especially in the United States, but there's quite a bit of European VC money going into what's called repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. Essentially what you're doing is you're stimulating the brain with magnetic pulse energy. And the good news is that the VCs and their investments, which amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, is they've developed the conversation. They've made stimulation of the brain an acceptable form of treatment in the psychiatric community. 4 years ago, Mr. Letkavich and I had a hard time getting anyone to really take us seriously to sit down and talk to us about stimulation of the brain that was non-invasive, that was undetectable, and had a better than 50% at that time success rate. Today, I can tell you that everybody wants to sit and visit and talk about the brain and stimulating the brain's ability to regulate itself. So let's talk about Nexalin and why its stimulation is so unique and so different. So you'll notice TACS, transcranial alternating current stimulation. We use an alternating current platform. We're not going to try to target any specific area of the brain. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to triangulate the entire midbrain. We're going to use an alternating current. For the electrical engineers in the room, if there are any, when you have the alternating current platform, from an electrical standpoint, this is like when you're comparing these other stimulators to alternating current, it's like a black and white TV to a color TV. You know, black and white, you have very few controls over your picture. But you notice today, when you go into your menu on your televisions, your color televisions, you have 10 or 12 different options to create your picture. Well, alternating current has many different platforms or techniques in developing your waveforms, your frequencies, and at the end of the day, what you're able to do is create stimulation that is undetectable to the patient. Quite comforting and quite efficacious. The Nexalin story. So Several of the presentations up here have talked about the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. They're in the process of preparing for FDA submissions based on these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. We support that model. It's obviously the basis of the international medical community. However, when we came to control Nexalin technology, we realized that what we needed to do was also have some space to develop the business model. We anticipated that this market was going to emerge. We knew that the VCs were developing these magnetic stimulators with their medical communities. And so what we decided to do was take some of the very early science. Again, we used a team of consultants that were very experienced with FDA clearances and CE clearances, and we went directly to the FDA and were awarded the clearances, as I mentioned earlier, for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and then we were CE'd in the other areas of the European countries as well. So now we had our regulatory clearances, and we needed to go to work to develop the business model. Today, we have 32 clinics in the United States currently offering the technique. In some of the clinics, we have multiple devices, 73 currently. That number will probably be at 120 within the next few months. One of our communities that is exploding is the substance abuse community, the addiction community, also the PTSD community, because as we all know, addiction is a brain-based disorder or a brain-based disease. And other than abstinence and group therapy, we really don't have any type of treatment for the disorder in the brain, with the exception of abstinence. And as we know, staying sober is the word in that community. Staying sober for any extended period of time is very difficult. You have extreme cravings, interruptions in sleep cycles, etc. Well, the area of the brain that is distorted or is dysregulated from the addiction, whether it's alcohol, amphetamines, opiates, whatever the addiction may be, is the midbrain. And when the midbrain is out of balance, you are not able to make good decisions. So you will choose to use drugs again rather than stay sober. Your midbrain is traumatized, so you don't sleep well. Your midbrain is traumatized, so you don't handle the normal day-to-day anxiety levels. So subsequently, we are now targeting the substance abuse centers all over the United States. That's a $35 billion industry in the United States alone, with about a 5% success rate. From there, now going back to the model of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies. As I mentioned earlier, we took our early science, we cleared the FDA, we cleared the CEs, and then we developed our business model. We developed a footprint in the country so that we would have a multi-site opportunity to perform science. We've now gone to 4 of the leading neuromodulation academic institutions in the United States. We have 6 clinical trials that are done through academic IRBs on the boards. We're currently working with the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia on what's called a randomized controlled trial. So essentially, these are the trials that are normally only available to your very high-end, well-funded medical companies, medical device companies, and pharmaceutical companies. We are hoping, again, to develop a relationship here in Poland that will help support some of these scientific endeavors here as well. We're working on CPT codes for third-party reimbursement. Our business model. This is something, again, that Mr. Letkavich and I created. We have a recurring model. We do not actually sell the hardware. In a time where doctors and physicians are required to spend large investments, sometimes as much as $150,000 for some of the equipment, down to as little as $50,000, our sales model is quite different. Essentially what we do is we come into the physician community, we install the hardware, we train the staff, and then we provide a license to you. And you will then pay a licensing fee to us. The licensing fee runs $2,000 a month up to a certain threshold of treatments, 50 treatments. At 51 and above, you start on a pay-per-click. All right, so we have a monthly revenue stream from the licensing. We also have a disposable. Our disposable costs approximately $3. Our target price will be $12 per disposable. So 2 monthly revenue streams. One is off the licensing fee, off the device. The other is off the disposables. At $3 is our internal cost, selling the disposable at $12. As I mentioned, there's no capital expense for the physician. And again, we also are targeting the patient community's affordability. What can a patient afford for treatment? We don't feel like the reimbursement model should be an issue, that if you don't have insurance or you do have insurance or will the insurance pay, we don't want to have that conversation. We don't want the physician to have that conversation. So again, our model is built on a cash pay model while we develop the third-party reimbursement. We mentioned earlier about our IP protection. As you will also see, not only did we establish IP protection all over the entire globe, we've also established clearances for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and all of the various treatments that you see listed there. Some of our early research was in phantom limb pain, as I mentioned, substance abuse, Parkinson's, bipolar disorder, alcohol abuse. Again, when you start looking at this list, there's one common denominator, and that is the brain. It's the brain, the brain, the brain. And since there's only two systems in the brain, as I said, the idea is to normalize the brain. We also have clearances for depression, anxiety, insomnia in all of these countries listed here. Of course, you'll see Poland there in the first category. Treatment opportunities. Again, when we start talking about mental health, brain-based disorders, I've listed several of the well-known brain disorders on the left side of the slide. Basically, there's a $900 billion just in the American markets for cost of care. $900 billion. As you can see, Nexalin technology in the United States is already cleared for the anxiety, the sleep disorders, the Parkinson's disorders in the CE mark, and the attention disorders is coming. The blue crosses indicates the future indications with the proper funding mechanism and proper research that we'll attempt to clear on next. When you look at the numbers of patients, rather than looking at the dollars spent, it speaks for itself. As I mentioned when we started, we all know somebody. There's literally tens and tens and tens of millions of people suffering from some form of some type of a brain disorder. Number of reasons for that. If we had more time, there's a few slides that have some information about what might be driving some of these issues, but for timing purposes, we're going to stay with just the high points. So when we started this journey over here to Poland, this was called our international strategy, and we felt like that we really wanted to try to be more specific and develop a relationship here in Poland. Mr. Letkavich and I are both really excited to be here and to be a part of this community. We've met several members of the team, which again, I appreciate everything that they've been doing with myself online and in conference calls preparing for this opportunity. But we are already working to establish partners in the research community at so you're going to have to forgive me for my Polish, is University of Wrocław, something like that, I think. I've heard 2 or 3 pronunciations for it. But yeah, I'm actually driving there this weekend, and I'll be meeting with the team there. They already have a neurostimulation lab and are looking at the very same systems of response to stimulations that we've been looking at in our research. So we're very excited about that. We are looking at a manufacturing relationships and distribution relationships. Basically, our message is that we intend to develop our entire international distribution model outside of the United States here in Poland. And we'd like to start here to arrange for some funding and some strategic relationships with this community, as we also then develop relationships with your clinical and research communities and your manufacturing, as well as some of the other business development opportunities. The other points on the slide are just basically talking about why we qualify for some of the opportunities here. So one of the missions to come to Poland also, which this is really what's driving the meeting, is we do have a very active research and development. We believe we've cracked the code of how to talk to the brain. The brain's innate language is basically frequencies, electrical frequencies. And we have a targeted electrical frequency that is patented and protected and clinically effective, and it is safe and it is comfortable. So from there, we felt like we needed to start developing a better understanding of that alternating current. And what you'll see here are just some fancy slides. The electrical engineers, if there's any in the room, will appreciate some of the algorithms that we're currently looking at, because again, there's a lot of moving parts to an alternating current. And there is obviously tremendous frequency fluctuation inside the brain. And we want to be able to be honest with you, it's our opinion that we think that not only have we developed the frequency to communicate with the brain, but we've also figured out why some of the population doesn't respond. And I'll save you the details of that from a physiology standpoint, but what we're going to do is work with your universities here and look at the opportunity to redevelop an entire hardware platform as well as a new algorithm. This is an indication here of our new hardware. You'll remember from the slide a few back that we had a big box sitting on a desk. Now we're going to be using tablets, and if you'll see that the smaller box on the left, it has a cord coming out of it. You'll see that we were triangulating in our original technology the midbrain. And now what you'll see is we have 4 electrodes. So now we will place one on the forehead, one at the top of the neck, one behind each ear. And there's some electrical manipulation that we're going to bring into that algorithm. And essentially, we expect efficacy to be close to 90%. So just imagine your loved ones, your family members, yourself, the people that struggle with any type of dependency or any type of a mental health disorder. Imagine 75 to 90% of them being able to receive treatment, 15 treatments. This is all that it takes for Nexalin technology to reset the brain systems. 15 treatments, 3 to 5 weeks. 75 to 90% of them will recover. We're a we're a private company. We're privately held in the United States. We are headquartered in Tustin, California. We also have an office in Houston, Texas. This is where I'm from. Nexalin technology holds the worldwide distribution rights for Nexalin. All of the patents and the IP protection is held in a company called Spiritus, of which Mr. Letkavich is the majority owner. We have approximately 750 shareholders. We did go through a reorganization when Mr. Letkavich took the company over. We now have 10 investors that actually own 50% of the company. Management controls 35%, and there's another affiliate section that's approximately 12%. I'm going to touch on the investment side. This was just a quick case study. This is a company called Helios Medical Technologies. It's currently trading on the Canadian Stock Exchange. They have no completed research at this point. They did receive some grants through the Department of Defense. They have no clearances. They have plans to, like other technology companies, they plan to wait to provide or to submit for clearances. They have no active business model. They have no income stream. They have no revenues. And currently, they're at a $200 million valuation, just on the idea of, you'll see the picture, of putting a device under the tongue, all right, and wearing a little collar around your neck that stimulates with a battery current the vagus nerve. And there's a picture of a woman sitting at a piano. It's specifically targeted for MS, and that's only the indication that they're currently involved with. If ever there was an indication of what the opportunity for Nexalin technology is, not from just the clinical standpoint, but from the investment standpoint and what our future looks like in the marketplace, this would be it. We're actually just almost ready to stop talking about Helios in our company, because we've been watching this for more than a year, and we've really built all of our models to basically accelerate our introduction into these markets, because this company essentially hasn't provided the community with any real substance yet. They may very well have something for MS. The one thing they do have is a celebrity. They have Montel Williams. He's actually more of a B-list celebrity now, but he has MS, and he's their national spokesman. Closing summary, it is non-invasive. So you do not put anything in the body. It's a simple pad on the forehead, a pad behind each ear. 40 minutes in a quiet room. It'll reset the area of the brain, the midbrain, that's associated with any disorder. We are the only alternating current stimulator in the world at this point that has received clearance from the CE and the FDA. We have higher efficacy than any current stimulator in the marketplace, with a very broad range of treatments. We have a proven business model that's well positioned for international distribution. It is scalable and sustainable. You don't buy the machine and go away. We develop a relationship with our physicians that creates a revenue stream for as long as the treatment is provided, both at the licensing level and at the disposable level. We are working with pharmaceuticals because we believe that if you lower the dosage amount, if you lower the number of medications, you are going to lower side effects. Everyone is aware of the side effect profile associated with medications. Patient care and efficacy is our primary focus. We do believe, and what the industry is also indicating, is that brain health is the key to overall health and wellness. The brain is in charge of everything going on in the body. It would stand to reason that if we started focusing on the brain first and use an upstream, downstream theory, so whatever you do upstream will manifest downstream. So by normalizing and stabilizing the brain would very well normalize and stabilize all of the associated systems of the body that are going to determine your overall health. It's a low cost for the physician and the patient, and that's all I've got. We can have lunch. Thank you very much.